We're at the beginning of Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph, where it says Amar Rava. So in this piece of Gemara, it was speaking about what it said in the Mishnah that you're allowed to send to your friend on Yontif even clothing that's Klayim, because you can make use of it. And the Gemara said if it's a rough material and it doesn't warm you, it doesn't have any benefit for you, so there's no issue of Klayim. And the Gemara brought a few examples for it, and the Gemara continues now with another few examples and halachas about this. 4 lines from the top. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Hanai tzrari de pshiti. These garments or these, maybe like a belt that has a space to put in its pshiti, coins, money. Ein ben mishum klayim. There's no klayim with this because it's a rough material. The coins makes it rough and it doesn't warm you. The brizani, but those that are used to put in it seeds, and it could warm you. Yesh ben mishum klayim. For this, there is an issue of klayim. Ravashi says, Echadze ve'echadze, both of them, ein ben mishum klayim. There's no issue of klayim because lefishein derech chimum bekach, because it's not the derech to use it, to dress yourself with it, to warm yourself with it. So in other words, what Ravashi is saying is, even if one of them is actually a little bit softer, but still, when it comes to any isser, we know that only if you do it in the derech, that the Torah says, are you over. Same thing also, it comes to achila. If you eat something that's not derech achila, there's no isser, not Torah. So the same thing over here, because it's not the derech to use this as a garment, so therefore there's no isser of klein. Next thing it said in the Mishnah, V'loi sandal amasumar. You're not allowed to send your friend a sandal which is made with spikes on Yontif. Sandal amasumar, my time aloi. What's the reason you can't send these kinds of sandals on Yontif? And for the Gemara, Mishum Smaisa Shahaya, because of a story that happened, which the Gemara brings in Masechta Shabbos. And there's different versions of what the story was. One of the versions is that there was a time when there was a Gzeira, and all the Yidden were hiding in a cave, and they didn't want to be discovered over there. They were doing on Shabbos, on Yontif, and they were wearing these sandal hamasumarim, this kind of sandals that had spikes in it. And at a certain point, being there in the cave, they were afraid that they got discovered, and they started running, or they started whatever. There was a commotion, and with the spikes, they killed each other. So once after that incident happened, they made a gzeira that on Shabbos and Yontif, you're not allowed to wear sandals with spikes. Amar Abaye, so Abaye said, sandal amasumar, the sandal with spikes, osel l'nala, you're not allowed to wear it, but a mutal taltalai, but you are allowed to move it on Yontif. It's not muktzah. It's still a keli, even if it's a keli shemalach de le'isr, but for certain purposes, you're allowed to move it. Osel l'nala, mishamaisa shahaya. You're not allowed to move it because of the story, as we just mentioned. And how do I know that it's not muktzeh? Mediktani, because in the Mishnah it says, Ein mishalchen. You're not allowed to send it to your friend on Yontif. If it would be something which is totally muktzeh, so you're not even allowed to move it. Does the Mishnah have to say that you're not allowed to send it? So the fact that the Mishnah includes this in the list of things that you're not allowed to send, I see that it's not muktzeh. The next thing it said in the Mishnah, you're not allowed to send your friend a shoe that's not sewed together, it's not fit to wear b'chlal. Fragt the Gemara pshita, isn't that obvious? And for the Gemara, even if it is sewed together, not properly, but with some wooden pegs that holds it together, so it could be worn b'shas atchak, but nevertheless, it's not properly made for wearing, so you're not allowed to send it on Yontif. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to sell a white shoe that wasn't painted yet, black, the way that you would wear it, so you're not allowed to send it. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda mater b'shocher. Rabbi Yehuda says shoes that are black that you can send. That's the way they wear it. But v'oiser b'lovan. But a white shoe you can't send with nishitzarech Beitza sagir, because it still needs Beitza sagir, which is some kind of a earth that they would use to color it black. So it's not colored yet, so it's not fit for using, so you can't send it. Rabbi Yosi oiser b'shocher. Rabbi Yosi says even the shoes after it's painted black is still not ready to be used. There's something else that has to still be done. What is that? They have to polish it and smooth it out. The skin, the hide that's used from the animal and to made into a leather for the shoe still has in it parts that are not smooth, and therefore it still can't be used. So the Gemara explains, V'loi pligi, it's not a machlokes here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. Marki Yasrei or Marki Yasrei. Each one is saying the halacha based on the way the leather was used in his place. V'asrei demar, in the place of Rabbi Yehuda, bisra letochas. So the place of the hide has two sides to it. There's the side that is where the flesh of the animal is, and then there's the outside of it, right? So the side where the flesh of the animal is, that's the side that's not smooth. That's the side that has to be smoothed out. So in that place where you have the hide of the animal, that's l'sochas, means towards the inside of the shoe. So therefore, it doesn't have to be polished outside. It's prepared to be worn because the outside is smooth. But ba'asrei demar, in the place of Rabbi Yosi, bisra le'el, the hide of the animal that was facing the basar of the animal, the flesh of the animal, is towards the outside. So therefore, it's not smooth. So it has to be smoothed out. So therefore, it can't be worn until it's shined and polished. So it's not yet fit to be worn. Then the Mishnah concluded, Zeh klal. The rule is anything that you could have benefit of it on this yantiv, that's something that you could send to your friend on yantiv. So the Gemara Rav Sheishes sharaluhu l'Rabbanan l'shduri tefillin b'yom v'tava. Rav Sheishes allowed the Rabbanan to send on yantiv to a friend even tefillin, even though you don't wear tefillin on yantiv, Shabbos and yantiv. There's no tefillin. Abaye said, but not on Nantanan, didn't we learn the Mishnah? Kol shena oisim by biyantiv, mishalchan oisay. Anything you could have benefit of on yantiv, that could be sent. So tefillin shouldn't be allowed. And for the Gemara, hachi ka'amar, the way to read the Mishnah is as follows. You have to put a comma here. Kol shena oisim by, which means even b'chayil. Anything that's prepared for use, and you could have benefit of it even on a weekday, not necessarily on yantiv. You can send it on a yantiv. That's how you read the Mishnah. Kol sheni by kama, even any day. In other words, excluding those things we mentioned before that are not ready. They're not prepared for use. It's not sewed. It's not ready for. But anything that's ready to be worn or to be used, even if b'payil we don't use it on yantiv, you could still send it. And the Rishayim say, I think the Rashba says the reason is because it's also an inyan of Simchas Yom. You send your friend a gift, something that's prepared to be used, even though he can't use it today. Something that he can't use yet, B'chlal, there's no Simcha by him receiving it, B'chlal. Huh? By these shoes before, if it's Muktzeh, no, the tefillin is not Muktzeh. It's not Muktzeh. Okay? Yeah. The Rashi over here says that even though we don't wear tefillin on Yontif, but nevertheless, Leke Isura. There's no Isser to put on the tefillin on Yontif. There's no mitzvah to put on the tefillin on Yontif, but there's no Isser either. That's what Rashi says. Hamrabaye, so now tefillin, hoyel v'asil yadon. Since this subject of wearing tefillin on Shabbos and Yontif came to us, we are discussing it. So name Abu Milsa. So let me tell you another halacha about this. This is a Gemara that we learned in Masechta Eruvin. Hoya baba derech. If a person was coming on the way, tefillin b'roisha, and he's wearing the tefillin on his head, v'shakal of chama, and the sun went down. So this is coming on his way on Erev Shabbos, and Shabbos comes in. So what does he do? Maniach yadei aleim. He should place his hands on the tefillin to cover it, so people shouldn't see that he's walking with the tefillin, because l'chatchila you shouldn't be carrying the tefillin and walking with it in the Rishus Harabim. But he has to bring the tefillin to a safe place. Can't leave it in the street where he's standing. So he should put his hands and cover the tefillin ad shemegia lebeisai till he gets home. He can put away his tefillin there. He was sitting in the Beis HaMedrash, a tefillin b'roisha, and he's still wearing tefillin. The Kiddush Shalav Hayom and Shabbos comes in. So he can't leave his tefillin in shul because it's not going to be safe over there. So Maniach Yadei Aleim, he puts his hands on the tefillin and he walks home with it until he arrives home with the tefillin. So here, what Abaye said is that you can walk all the way home with your tefillin, whether you were in the middle of the way or whether you were in shul. So Ravona Berei asked the question, but in a Braisa it says different. In a Braisa it says, Hoya Baba Derech, a tefillin b'roishay. He was coming on his way out of Shabbos and the tefillin is on his head. V'kiddush Shalav Hayom and Shabbos enters. What does he do? Maniach yadei aleim at shemegia lebayis hasamach l'chayma. So you put your hands and you cover the tefillin and you don't go all the way home. You come to the first house that's near the wall of the city. In other words, the first safe place for the tefillin, and there you should put away the tefillin over there for Shabbos. And the same thing, if you were sitting in the shul, the Kiddush Shalav Hayom and Shabbos comes in, Meniach Yadei Aleim, you cover the tefillin, you come to the first house near the shul, and that's where you leave the tefillin. You don't go home with your tefillin. So we see that you can't go all the way home with it. So how could Abaye say you could? And for the Gemara, it's not a question. Ha de mintere. In a case where that house that's near the wall of the city or near the shul, over there the tefillin will be protected there. So you bring it there and you don't go any further with it. And the loy mintere. Abaye was talking about a case where there is no other house there, that it'll be safe, it'll be protected there. So then you can walk with the tefillin all the way home. Fragt die Gemara, the loy mintere. If we're talking about tefillin that's not going to be protected where it is, and even in the first house, so ma'ir yiberoishay. Why does it say that if the tefillin is on your head, so it's mashma, because you're already wearing the tefillin, so then you're allowed to go and take it home. Even if it's not on your head, even if the tefillin is just lying there on the ground, the halacha should apply the same thing. You can't let the tefillin where it is. If you see it there, when Shabbos comes in, you should take the tefillin into a safe place. We learned in the Mishnah, it says, a person finds tefillin on Shabbos out in the field or wherever it is. So what do? You can't leave it there. Machnisan zug, you take in one pair at a time. You wear it, you put it on, you wear it. You can't carry it in your hands. You can't carry it in your shusarab. So you put it on like a lavush, like you're wearing it, and you take one pair at a time and you bring it in. So why did Abaye dafka say when he's wearing the tefillin? And for the Gemara, loy kashya, it's not a question. De mintere machmas ganvi or machmas klovi. If you have a place that is protected from ganovim and also from dogs, it's a place that's fully protected. The tefillin is fully protected from ganovim and from dogs as well. So then in such a case, you have to bring in the tefillin all the way, even if the tefillin is lying on the ground, so you have to bring the tefillin into a place where it's going to be protected from ganovim and from klovim. De mintere machmas klovi v'loy mintere machmas ganvi. But then, what Abaye came to say is something else. In a situation where you're bringing your tefillin in, and that house that's right near the wall of the city, or the house that's near the shul, is a place that's protected from dogs, but it's not protected from ganovim though. So over here, this was the main chiddush of Abaye, that if you're wearing the tefillin in your head, you're allowed to go all the way into your house, even though it's l'chayre protected mostly. From the dogs it's protected. Not only that, the Gemara explains, Mao the Taime, I would think to say, Roiv listim Yisrael ninu. Who are most of the Ganovim? Most of the Ganovim are the Yidden. So if they know that this is tefillin, they're not going to be mezalzel in the tefillin. So you don't have to be afraid that they're going to steal the tefillin. So therefore, Kamash Molan, Abaye came and taught that if you're wearing the tefillin on your head already, so then you're allowed to take the tefillin all the way into your house if that house that's near the wall is not fully protected. But if you're not wearing the tefillin on your head, if the tefillin was just found on the floor, so then you can't do what Abaye said. You can't take it all the way to your house. You have to put it by that house that's near the wall, because it's over there, it's going to be mostly protected. The dogs can't take it, and even the Yisrael, which are Reiv Ganvi Yisrael, or Reiv Listim Yisrael, you don't have to be concerned about that. Hadron, Allah, Beyed. This is the conclusion of the first Perek of Masechta Beya. Okay. Start the second Perek of the Masechta. And the beginning of this Perek will talk about the halacha of Erev Tavshilin. When you have Yontif that falls out right before Shabbos, so you're not allowed to cook and prepare everything you need for Shabbos without an Erev Tavshilin. And we'll see here all the details about this halacha. Zok Mishnah, Yontif shechaliyis Erev Shabbos. If Yontif falls out on Erev Shabbos, lo yevashel betchila miyontif l'Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook. Start cooking from Yontif for Shabbos. You're cooking especially on Yontif for Shabbos. You're not allowed. Aval mevashel hu liyontif. You're allowed to cook on Yontif for the food that you need for Yontif itself. And vim hoiser, if there's food that's left over from the Shabbos food, hoiser. So you have leftovers that you can use from Yontif for Shabbos. So hoiser l'Shabbos, it's left over for Shabbos. That's the first part of the Mishnah. So this is before we come to the din of Erev Tavshilin, that if you have leftovers from Shabbos, you can use it for Yom Tov. But now if you want to cook, especially for the purpose of Shabbos, you want to cook on Yom Tov, not from the leftovers, but you want to cook for Yom Tov, so then there's the Erev Tavshilin. V'oise tafshil me'erev Yom Tov, if you prepare a tafshil, if you prepare something that you cook from before Yontif for the purpose of Shabbos, and then v'saymich olav l'Shabbos. You can rely on that for Shabbos to be allowed to cook on Yontif for the purpose of Shabbos. And the Gemara will explain what Erev Tavshilin is and why this is, but this is where how the Mishnah says the halacha of Erev Tavshilin. And once you prepare a tafshil before Yontif, then you're allowed to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. Now, what exactly is this tafshil that you have to prepare? So it's a machlokes. Beishamai yoimrim, Beishamai say shnei tafshilin. It has to be 2 different cooked items that you have to prepare before Yom Tov to be allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Beis Hillel yoimrim, Beis Hillel says tafshil echad, that you only need one cooked item, one thing that you prepare for the Erev Tafshilin. V'shavin, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel will agree, b'dog u'beitza sha'alav, that if you have fish and you have an egg that's made together with the fish, the egg that's like opened up and cracked and it's cooked together with the fish, she'ein shnei tafshilin, that counts as 2 different tafshilin. Even though the egg is cooked together with the fish, it's still considered to be 2 tafshilin. Okay, we'll see the details in the Gemara, how we pass in the B'poil. Today, B'poil, we use 2 different things. We'll see everything in the Gemara. Now, the Mishnah says another thing. Ochloi, if the Erev Tafshilin was already eaten up, Oisha Avad, or got lost, you misplaced it, you don't have it. Lo yevashel olav b'tchila, you're not allowed to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. V'im shiur mimenu kol shehu, if there's even just a drop left over from this Erev Tafshilin, Saimech olav l'Shabbos. You still could rely on this to be able to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. Zok the Gemara, mili. From where do I know? Or in other words, the shot of the Gemara's question really is, where's the source of why the Chachamim made this takana of Erev Tafshilin? So, before we see what the Gemara says inside, so the Gemara over here doesn't explain the whole background of Erev Tafshilin. But this Gemara in Psachim on Daf Mem Vav, and Taisus quoted it before in Daf Beitza mit Beis in Masechta Beya, and Alter Rebbe, Shulchan Aruch, and Siman Tov Kuf Chav Zayin, right in the beginning, quotes it by Riches, that there is no way you can use Erev Tafshilin as a heter if it would be Asam and Atayre to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. It can't be Mater or Isam and Atayre, just with Erev Tafshilin. Elamai, Min Atayre, it's mutter to cook and prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbos. For 2 reasons. Either because if you prepare on Yom Tov, and you say that maybe guests will come later. This is the lashon of the Gemara in Psachim. Hoyel v'mikli orchim. Since this food you're cooking now could be used later in the afternoon for guests, so therefore minat Torah that would be allowed. Even if you're cooking it and you need it yourself for Yom Tov. You're cooking it and you're going to use it for Shabbos. But since it could be used for other people that might come to your house in the afternoon, it's allowed minat Torah. That's according to Rabbah. According to Rav Chisda does not hold to the concept of Hoyel, but Rav Chisda holds that the whole Isser of cooking of Yontif on Yontif for the next day, right? Yontif, there's only a heter to cook for Yontif itself. You're not allowed to cook on Yontif for the following weekday. Rav Chisda holds that's only if the following day is a weekday. But if the following day is a Shabbos, the Yontif and the Shabbos are considered to be one Kedusha, and Minat Torah you're allowed to cook from Yontif to Shabbos. There's no problem whatsoever. So therefore Minat Torah there's no issue. Elamai, midrabanan, they aser to cook from Yontif to Shabbos. And not only did they aser it on one hand, but then they made a takana of Erev Tafshilin that you should allow to cook, that it should be allowed to cook. So when the Gemara here says Minan and Mili, it's not only a Minan and Mili, how do we know what's the reason for this heter of Erev Tafshilin, but it's really a question, what's b'chlal the whole inyan of Erev Tafshilin? If Minat Torah, it's mutter anyways to cook from Yontif to Shabbos for the 2 reasons that I mentioned before, so what's b'chlal the whole Isser? And we need the Erev Tafshilin to be matter that Isser. What's this whole thing b'chlal? That's how you learn pshat in this Gemara here. Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel answers and says, the Omakra, the Pasuk says, Zocher esim Shabbos l'katshe. You should remember Shabbos to sanctify it, which means Zachreyu. You have to be sure to remember Shabbos, me'achar shebal ashkicha, since you could come to forget it. Okay, that's the Pasuk. But how is this a Pasuk, a source for Erev Tafshilin? For this Isra to cook from Yontif to Shabbos and Erev Tafshilin. So my time. So what's the reason you're preparing the Erev Tafshilin from before Yontif? Amar Rave, so Rave says the pshat is as follows: Kidei sheyivrer mana yafel l'Shabbos. In order for the person to select and prepare a good portion of food for Shabbos, mana yafel l'Yontif, and a portion of food for Yontif. In other words, according to Rave, the whole point of Erev Tafshilin is l'kavet Shabbos. Because a person is so busy preparing for the 2 days of Yontif, all the food he needs for Yontif, so he's not going to remember to prepare and leave food also for Shabbos. He's going to come Shabbos, he's going to have no food for Shabbos. So therefore they will masakin Erev Tafshilin, that before Yontiv you should prepare the food, so like this you'll remember to have the food for Shabbos. That's Rav's pshat. Ravashi says, Kedeshi Yaimru, it's not L'Kovet Shabbos, it's L'Kovet Yontiv actually. in order that people should say, Ein oifin mi Yom Tov l'Shabbos. Look, there's an issa to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, unless you make this Erev Tavshilin. How much more so, this will remind people that you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to a weekday. So what's the point of the Erev Tavshilin? If you prepare the Erev Tavshilin from before Yom Tov for Shabbos, so then when you're cooking on Yom Tov for the purpose of Shabbos, so you're just concluding. Rashi calls it Yegayme v'Hailach. You're just concluding what you began cooking from before. So people will realize to begin cooking on Yom Tov for the purpose of Shabbos, that's not allowed. So from here, people will learn out the kavod of Yom Tov, that on Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook for Yom Tov itself, but you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for a weekday and even not for a Shabbos, unless you began cooking from before. So that's the machlokes of Rava and Avashi. Is the point of Erev Tavshilin lekavod Shabbos, to remember to put aside food for Shabbos, or is the point of Erev Tavshilin lekavod Yom Tov, to emphasize to what extent you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov if it's not for the purpose of Yom Tov itself? So Gemara Text, so what did we learn in our Mishnah? Oise Tavshil me'erev Yom Tov. You prepare this food of Erev Tavshilin from when? From before Yom Tov. V'sayim b'chalav l'Shabbos, and you can rely on this to be able to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. So you can't prepare the Erev Tavshilin on Yom Tov, it has to be prepared on Erev Yom Tov. We understand clearly according to Ravashi, the Amar Ravashi said, the whole purpose of the Erev Tavshilin is so that people should realize that you can't begin cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. You have to begin cooking from before Yom Tov for Shabbos. So then, when you're cooking on Yom Tov, you're just finishing off what you began before. Sahaina the Erev Yom Tov. That's why it has to be done from before Yom Tov. You have to put the Erev Tavshilin before Yom Tov. That works, then be Yom Tov loy. On Yom Tov itself, the Erev Tavshilin doesn't work. The whole point is dafka to begin cooking from before Yom Tov. But according to Rava, that says, what's the point? That you should put aside a portion of food for the kavod Shabbos. Don't forget about kavod Shabbos. If so, my area Erev Yom Tov. Why does it have to be dafka from Erev Yom Tov? Afilu be Yom Tov nami. How about Yom Tov in the morning? Before you have your meal for Yom Tov, so then you should put aside some food for Shabbos to remind you that you have to have a portion of food for Shabbos. So that can be done Yom Tov in the morning. So the Gemara says, "Enochanami." You're right. It should have been able to be done then in the morning of Yom Tov. But Ella Gzeira Shema Yifsha. The only reason it has to be done dafke on Erev Yom Tov is because we're afraid that a person will be pesheya, that he'll forget, because he's going to be busy on Yom Tov itself, and you might not do the Erev Tavshilin. So therefore, you have to do the Erev Tavshilin dafke from before Yom Tov. Okay, now but there's another nafka minna between these two reasons, which the Rosh brings over here. Do you have to make the Erev Tavshilin on Erev Yom Tov dafke, or could you make the Erev Tavshilin from even before Erev Yom Tov? If the reason is to remind you to put aside a portion of food for Shabbos, so then that has to be dafka on Erev Yom Tov. Because that's when you're preparing all the food, and you want to focus that you should remember for the food for Shabbos, not just for Yom Tov. But if the point is that when you cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, you have to continue from what you began cooking from before. You're not allowed to start cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. It has to be a hemshech of what you began from before. That doesn't have to be dafka a hemshech from Erev Yom Tov. Even if it was a few days from before, as long as that food is still fresh, you could continue cooking on Yom Tov. And the Alter Rebbe brings this to Shulchan Aruch. The interesting thing is, when you look here in the Gemara, it seems to be a machlokes between Rava and Ravashi what the reason of Erev Tavshilin is. Is it l'kavod Shabbos or l'kavod Yom Tov? But the Alter Rebbe, it's a famous thing. Alter Rebbe, when he brings this, the Alter Rebbe says, that there's two reasons they were masaken Erev Tavshilin for. The Alter Rebbe brings both Rava and Ravashi together, and he says you have both reasons, and we take the chumras of both reasons when we do Erev Tavshilin, and we pass like both of them together. In other words, like they're not Alter Rebbe learned the Gemara, they're not arguing. Mara machada v'loi pligi. Erev Tavshilin serves two purposes: kavod Shabbos, to remind you to have food for Shabbos, and l'kavod Yom Tov, to remind you that you're not allowed to stam cook on Yom Tov for no reason for the weekday. So the Gemara Tana Ma'isila Mahacha. There's another Tana that he explained the source of Erev Tavshilin, and he brought an asmachta, even though it's a takon of Chazal, but he brought it from a pasuk. It's a shateifu eifu. What you will bake today before Shabbos. V'es shatevashlu bashelu, and what you will cook from before. Mikan Amar Rabbi Lazar ein oifin. You can't cook for the purpose of Shabbos on Yom Tov, ela ala ofoi, only on something that was already cooked and prepared, started cooking from before. Ve'im mevashlin, and you can't cook on Yom Tov, ela ala mavushal, only on something that you already began cooking from before. Mikan samchu chachamim. From here, the chachamim brought an asmachta. They relied their takana le'erev tafshilin minat Torah, for the concept of erev tafshilin from this pasuk over here. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Beitza. Ma'aseh b'Rabbi Eliezer. There was once a story with Rabbi Eliezer. Shehaya yoshev v'doirish kol hayom kuloi b'hilchos Yom Tov. He was sitting all day in the Beis Medrash on Yom Tov, and he was darshaning. He was teaching the halachas of Yom Tov on Yom Tov. So then his drasha became, his shiur got very long. Yatzas katri shayna. There was the first group that got up to leave in the middle of the shiur. So Amar, Rabbi Eliezer commented, Halalu bali patosin. These individuals that just left, they have very large barrels. They have a lot of food or a lot of wine to drink, and therefore they're leaving early. They're going to eat and drink a lot. So when he said this comment, it wasn't clear if he's saying this in the positive or in the negative. Was he saying to them, oh, look at these people, they have so much to eat and they're leaving from learning Torah? Or maybe he was saying it in the positive. They're going to be in the midst of Simchas Yom Tov, and look how much they're mahader, they have so much to eat. Kachniya, the second group, got up to leave. Omar, he said, Halolu bali chavius. These people have barrels that are not as large as patosin, but they also have a lot to eat and drink, and therefore they're leaving now. Katshlishes, the third group, got up to leave. Omar, he said, Halolu bali kadin. These people are bali kadin, jugs, smaller a little bit. Katrevius, the fourth group, got up to leave. Omar, he said, Halolu bali laginin. These are bali laginin, even smaller. Kat chamishis, the fifth group, got up to leave. Omar, he said, Halolu bali kaisis. They have cups to drink of. That's all they have, and therefore they're leaving now. Hischilo katshishis lotzes. The sixth group began leaving. Amar, he said about them, Halolu bale me'eda. These people deserve to be cursed. What's the reason for this? Nu l'chayda, they stayed on even longer. So why should they be cursed? So Rashi here says the reason is because when they got up, the shul was getting very, very empty. And Rashi says, Gnaya dava kosher beinov. The fact that they were the ones that caused the shul to get so empty, so therefore he said that they're Bali Me'eda. That's Rashi's pshat. Rabbeinu Chananel, the Aruch, says the reason why they are Bali Me'eda, so he says because they have nothing. They weren't Mekai in the midst of Simchas Yom Tov properly, because they're coming so late to their meal. On the other hand, they're not learning Torah properly, because they're not staying for the end of the shiur to hear the main point in the end. So they have nothing. Bali Me'eda. They lose out in both worlds. That's what Rabbeinu Chananel says. Then Nasan Einav b'Talmidim. Then those few that were still left that did not leave, he looked at them. He gazed at them, so that he wasn't sure. They that is the Talmidim weren't sure why he's looking at them. His chilu pnei mishtanim, the color of their face began to change. They thought that maybe they did something wrong by staying there so long. In other words, they thought that maybe when he was commenting regarding all the others that left early, he was commenting maybe about them in the positive sense, that they went to be Mekayim Mitzvah Simchas Yom Tov and what they did was proper. And now he's looking at them, why are you still sitting here? Don't you have to go to be Mekayim Simchas Yom Tov? So they weren't sure. So he said to them, Amalehem, he said to those, the students that remained, Banai, my children, Lo lechem ani yomer. I'm not for you, was I saying the comments that I said before, that it's negative on you that you stayed here. Ela lahalalu sheyatzu. I was saying for them, the comment that I was saying for them was negative. Sheyatzu, that they left from learning. Shemanichin chaye elam, they're leaving the shiur, which is learning Torah, which is everlasting life, v'oiskim b'chaye shah, and they're going to eat, which is just temporary life. B'shas, pitirasa, and then finally, when those few students that were left, and they finished the shiur, and they got up to leave, Amalem, then he told them, go, ichlu mashmanim, shtu mamtakim, go eat and drink, go send portions of food to those that don't have prepared. It's a holy day for the master. Don't be sad. The Eibishter's joy is your strength. This is the story. So now the Gemara asks on this story. So what did it say all the way at the end? What did he tell the students when they were leaving? That that those that left early. So what was the issue? That he was said that what they did was wrong because they left the shiur of learning Torah and they're going to eat. And that's called Chaye Shah, temporary life. Fragt the Gemara, how could you say that's temporary life? Was Simchas Yom Tov mitzvah. But they're going to do the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. That's also a mitzvah. That's not temporary life. And for the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, this is Rabbi Eliezer. He follows his opinion, the Omar. He says, Simchas Yom Tov Rishus, that the whole mitzvah of eating and drinking on Yom Tov is only a Rishus. The Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein leila adam b'yomtiv. A person in the yomtiv has the following options. Or you can eat and drink. Or you can sit and learn all day. There's no obligation. There's no obligation to have a sudas yomtiv b'chlal. You have a choice, one or the other. Rabbi Yeshua says it's not a choice, and we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. Chalkeyu, you have to divide the day. Chetzi l'Hashem, v'chetzi l'chem. Half of the day should be for the Eibishter, and half of the day should be for you to eat and drink. Rabbi Yechanan explains, they both darshan from the same pasuk, or the same two psukim. Because of Echadayim, and one pasuk it says, Atzeres L'Shem L'Kecha, that is dedicated to the Eibishter. Because of Echadayim, another pasuk it says, Atzeres Tia L'Chem. So how do we reconcile these two psukim? Rabbi Eliezer Savar, Oy Kulil Hashem, Oy Kulil Lachem. That's exactly what the pasuk is trying to tell you. That it's your choice, whether you want it to be Lashem or Lachem. Rabbi Yeshua Savar, Rabbi Yeshua says, Chalkeyu, you have to divide the day. Chetzi Lashem, Chetzi Lachem. Half is for you and half is for the Eibishter. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer, according to his opinion, holds there's no obligation to go eat and drink. And therefore, when they were leaving to go do that, he calls it Chayisha. It's interesting because he calls it Chayisha, even though, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's not an obligation. But if you do go eat and drink, you are doing a mitzvah. You could continue sitting and learning and fulfill your mitzvah that way. But when you go eat and drink, it's also a mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv. Elamai, it's not a chiyuv, so therefore you called it Chayisha. There's two pshatim in the Mefarshim in Negei to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. When Rabbi Eliezer says, Oy Eichel V'Shaisa, Oy Yeshiv V'Shaina, what does that mean? Is he saying, you must be Mekayim mitzvah Simchas Yantiv? Elamai, you can be Mekayim Simchas Yantiv in two ways. Either by sitting and learning Torah, and you give the Simcha to your Neshama, or Simchas Yantiv can be fulfilled by giving the Simchas Yantiv to your Guf. That's what he was saying. Others say, no, that's not the Pshat in Rabbi Eliezer. Simchas Yantiv is only the Simcha for the Guf. Elamai, what he's saying is that the mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv is a mitzvah. You have a choice if you want to fulfill the mitzvah or not. If you're sitting and learning, you're not doing the mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv. Or you can go and eat and drink and do the mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv. But as I said, we passing like Rabbi Yeshua. And regarding Rabbi Yeshua, there's an interesting shayla also that Mefarshim discuss. When he says Chalkeyu, does it literally mean to divide the day half and half? Or does he mean part and part? But it doesn't have to be mamish half and half. From the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Kuf Chof Tes, where he speaks about the mitzvah Simchas Yomtiv, it's actually mashma that it should be divided exactly half and half. And the Alter Rebbe there describes Kachi Adas, this is how it should be done. That you daven the first part of the day you daven, and then the second half of the day you eat, and until Chatzais. And the Alter Rebbe there says, in the first part of the day you eat a little bit, but then you make up for the fact that in the second half of the day you go to a shiur of Torah, so it comes out to be mamish half and half. So from the Alter Rebbe's Lashon Shulchan Aruch, it's mashma that it's still chatzais and it should take be mamish half and half. Interesting. Now the Gemara explains, what does it mean when it said, Mai le'ein nochel, what does it mean sent to those that don't have prepared food? Someone that did not make an Erev Tavshilin and he won't have food what to eat for Shabbos, so send for him food that he needs. Others say, what does this mean? He didn't have any food to make Erev Tavshilin, so he couldn't. He was a Einus. Someone that had the food and he did not do it, that's Tama Pesheya, that's not who he was referring to. What does it mean that the Eibish's joy is your strength? Rabbi Yechanan said, the Eibishah tells Yidden, Banai, my children, Lavu alai, you can borrow money on my account, the kitchuk d'shesayim, and sanctify the holiness of the day, v'aminubi, and trust in me, v'ani pereya, and I'll pay up for you whatever you spend for the meals of Shabbos and Yontif. Okay, so a thesis of it is a famous thesis that says that it's not so pashut, because there's another Gemara that says, Asay Shabbat chalchel v'al tetzarech lebrius, meaning that if you don't have food for Shabbos and Yontif, don't go borrow money, don't go take money from people, but you should just keep your Shabbos like a regular weekday. So Taisa says that what it says here in the Gemara, you could borrow money on the Eibishter's account, that's if you have something to pay back. So if you have what to pay back, so why do you have to borrow money? So the Marshal, the Mefarshim explained, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch brings this, it means if you own possessions, if you have a house, you have other possessions that you can give as a mashkin, as a collateral, but not that you have money to pay back. You have no money to pay back, but you have something as a mashkin. But there's an arichas de from the Rebbe about this, which is in Chelik Tazai and Parshas Yisroi, or Parshas B'Shalach. There the Rebbe explains, it's not the pshat that you're planning to pay back with your possessions. The Gemara says, rely on the Eibishter, Haminu bi. It's a condition that you're only allowed to do this if you own possessions that could be used theoretically as a mashkin. But nevertheless, when you're borrowing the money, you're relying on the Eibishter, that the Eibishter is the one that's going to pay back. That on Bani Peireya. Rabbi Yechanan said, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon, Haraitze she is kaim a chasav. Person that wants his money should last. So Yita ben Adar, you should plant on his property this tree that's called an Adar. Shenemar Adir B'Morim Hashem. So this tree has a koyach, it's connected to the Eibishter, that the Eibishter gives you a bracha in what you're doing. Inami Adra Kishmei. The name of the tree is Adra, which means Kedamri Inshi, my Adra. What does Adra mean? The Kaime Ledori Dori. That it remains for all future generations. Tanya Namiyachi, we learned this in a Beitza, Sadash Yesh Ba'adar, a field that has in it this tree that's called an Adar, Einan Exeles, will not be stolen, Ve'einan Echmeses, is not taken by you by force, Pereseh Mishtamshin. And the food, the fruits that you have in it will be protected always.